We're rolling.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It may be evening, but we're doing this in the afternoon. I am your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, wherever you are. You're my family. My name is Rosalind Talby. I was 93 years old in November, and I've been thinking about all of you a great deal, and the world you're growing up in, and how different it is from the world that I grew up in. So one of the reasons I'm doing this is to maybe tell you a little bit about the world I grew up in and how different it was from your world. And I'm sure it'll be evolving as time goes on. I don't know how old you'll be when you watch this, but I hope you understand that I'm doing this with love and with pleasure, with the help of my dear daughter Wendy, who is your aunt, and she is the professional. So let me begin. I was born in the year 1925, which I'm sure sounds ancient and so far away from you, and it was a long time ago. I was born to my mom and dad. My mom's name was Dorothy. My dad's name was Harry. And they were caring, loving parents who did the best they could for me. I grew up modestly. We lived in a brownstone in Williamsburg, which was certainly not as posh then as it is now. It was a neighborhood of a mixture of Jewish, Italian, and Irish people, and everyone blended together. I had friends from all neighborhoods, and we all blended together beautifully. I had a brother that was born in 1932. His name was Martin, and I was very, very fond of him. I adored him. He was a beautiful little boy. My mom was a very strict mother. She had certain rules and regulations which you had to follow, and if you didn't, you were punished. Really, she let you know. My dad, the opposite, was the sweetest, kindest, gentlest man you could ever want to meet. Everyone that knew him loved him, from his family down to all of my friends. He was wonderful, and he was a staunch supporter to me, very helpful. As time grew on, we moved from the brownstone, where it was a very secure growing up because there was family. My grandfather and aunt and uncle lived upstairs, and family lived on the lower floors, so it was a very loving, warm growing up. From there, we moved to a brand new apartment in one of the first public housing projects that were ever built. And that was also in Williamsburg, but in another part. I changed schools, met new friends, and we lived there until I graduated from high school, which was in 1941, I believe, or 41, I believe. And I was 17 and a half, and I did not go on to college. My mother did not think it was necessary, even though at that time City College and Brooklyn College was tuition free, and I wanted to go. But because of our economic circumstances, my mother told me while I was in high school to change my courses from academic to commercial, which I did because she demanded it, and I was not strong enough or secure enough to stand up to her. And as much as I wanted to go to college, I didn't. As I said, I wasn't strong enough to stand up to her. But I did go to work immediately after graduation, and I worked as a secretary with many different places, organizations, companies, and I would change my job periodically and increase my salary and give my mother a certain amount of money every week, and manage to get better and better jobs. And during that time, I met your grandfather, Isidore. I was, actually, I met him, I was in high school. I was very young. And we became friendly with his boyfriends and my girlfriends, and we socialized a lot. And in time, I met a very good friend of his who I really loved, and his name was Stanley. And just about the time of the war, Stanley and I became engaged. He was a lovely young man, a beautiful young man. And unfortunately, he went to war and was killed. He was killed over Holland. He was an aerial gunner in the 8th Air Force. And he was killed on a mission to Holland. And it was actually fire from one of our own planes that shot his plane down. So I was very sad at the time. I was 19, 20, and very vulnerable and very sad and very lonely for a long while. And I had one of the men I worked for, his name was Irving Friese, was a wonderful man who belonged to Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. And he introduced me there, and I worked for the organization that helped the servicemen, and so I would serve them coffee, donuts. I worked the switchboard, but it kept me occupied for a few nights a week. And then the war came to an end, thank God, after much misery. And I got a call one night from Isidore Talvey, who we always called by his last name, Talvey. And he told my mom that he had moved from Williamsburg and lived not too far from where we did in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. So to make it briefer, we met up, and we subsequently became engaged and married on November 7th, 1948. A year later, my first child, your Uncle Stephen, who unfortunately you never met, you younger ones, was born on the day of my first anniversary. And so I started my family. Subsequently, we moved from an apartment to our first home in West Hempstead, Long Island, which was built on a large potato farm. A lot of the builders bought up properties in Long Island that were just flat and used to grow potatoes and corn, and they built these communities of houses, all alike, all from a cookie cutter. If you came home drunk one night, you could really go into your neighbor's house without knowing it. And we moved there when Stephen was about a year and a half, and we had a lovely little house, and I loved it. We made great friends, and a few years later, on September 27th, 1952, your Aunt Wendy was born. And I was very fortunate. I had a son and a daughter and a loving husband who was working very hard and earning a very good living and growing his business. And we were very happy there. We had some wonderful times. We went on vacations. We celebrated a lot of good things. And it was a wonderful life. And then we had a third child in 1959. On December 8th, your Aunt Deborah was born. And that was a blessing because I felt I was very lucky. I had 2 daughters. I had my son. What else could a woman want? My husband was doing very well. And we decided that we were going to move. We had made very good friends in West Hempstead, but times were changing. Some people moved away, others were stayed there, but we decided we wanted to move upward. So we moved to Great Neck, Long Island, Kings Point and Great Neck, and we built our own home, which was, to me, a mansion, and it was beautiful. We built it on Long Island Sound, right overlooking the water, and we had a wonderful life there. We decorated the house beautifully, and Deborah changed schools, and Wendy started junior high school, and Stephen started high school, and everything was going great for us. And we lived there for many years, and then times changed, and my Poppy Isidore's business changed. He decided to leave the business that we had started together. I didn't go into that, but Poppy and I did start a business together, the import-export business called ID Talvey Trading Company, which was the the initial business, and from that it grew to importing and exporting not only little sundries, but then Poppy went into the stainless steel business and took his two brothers, Mark and Jack, in as partners, and it grew substantially into a very big business. But at one point, Poppy, while we were living in our house in Great Neck for about 10 years, he decided he was going to leave, which at that time the name had changed to Franklin Stainless Steel, to leave the company and sell it out to his brothers, which turned out to be a big, big mistake, because at that time the building business was at its lowest and the stainless steel business was booming. So his timing was not good. Anyway, he started another little business in trading in stainless steel. But from that point on, we kind of struggled a little, and financially we ran into some problems. And we sold, by that time, we had passed our 25th anniversary. Your Uncle Stephen was going to law school. Aunt Wendy was graduated from high school and was going on to college in Colorado. And Aunt Deborah was little, and she was home with me, and she was like sort of a salvation to me when my two older children were away. And we bonded in a way that a little girl of 10 or 12 can with her mom, and we had a lot of good times together. I missed my two older children, but they were well on their way. It was soon after that we had to sell the house, mainly for financial reasons, which was very disappointing to me, because we built it, my heart was in it. But times change, and you have to move along with the times. And so we did. And by that time, Aunt Deborah was starting college as well, up in Hamilton, New York. So we moved into an apartment in a complex called North Shore Towers. And we had a very nice apartment there. And things moved along, and then Aunt Deborah was dating a young man and becoming engaged, and by that time Uncle Stephen had married Aunt Sandy, and Eric, you were born. And a little after that, Aunt Deborah got married and graduated from law school, and Aunt Wendy was doing very well in her work as a you were a art director. You were an art director for World Tennis Magazine, and then went on to other very successful magazines and did very well in your job. And soon after Aunt Deborah was married and Uncle Stephen had married, we decided apartment living was not for us. And we moved on and bought a lovely home in a town called Port Jefferson on Long Island, which was also near the water and a very nice community. And it was there that we lived for the next 14 years of our life. During that time, Aunt Wendy got married and had Julia, and Aunt Deborah had Jacob, and she remarried and had Rebecca, and Aunt Sandy and Uncle Stephen had Michael. So the family was growing, and we spent a lot of time together. We spent a lot of holidays together, Passover and the holidays, the beginning of the year, and Christmas, and we spent a lot of time, good time together. And it was there that Poppy has passed away in 1995. And after a short time, about 2 years, I decided to change my life, and I moved to Florida. That was in 1997. And I lived in Florida for a nice long time, about 18 years, and had lots of good friends and had very good times, and I missed the family, but all of you back here in the East were busy growing your families and doing your thing, and we each led our lives with full knowledge of each other, keeping in touch and visiting. But then I decided to come back to New York about 4 years ago. I wasn't feeling that well, getting a little older, and Aunt Wendy and Aunt Deborah found a beautiful apartment for me in a senior independent living, and that's where I am now. But the changes I want to tell you about are the changes in the world that I lived in. I grew up in a world that was fairly secure. The Second World War was horrific, and I was old enough to appreciate the difficulty, the problems, and the sadness of it. But we survived it. But then all the changes politically and the changes economically that have occurred in this world have been very difficult to move along with, because it changed all of our lives so much. And I know that as time goes on, I don't know what the world will be that you will grow up in, my great-grandchildren, to Sloan and to Stefano and to Eleanor and to Gabrielle. I don't know what the world will be like when you grow up. I hope it will be a better world, an easier world. Your parents work very hard to do everything they can for you, as Aunt Wendy and Aunt Deborah and Uncle Stephen did for their children, and as I did for mine. And I guess that's an evolution of the times. But all the new inventions, all the new creations. I remember as a 14-year-old going to the World's Fair in 1939, and General Motors had a display of the highways and what it would be like in years to come, and of all the electric stoves and all the new inventions that at that time we couldn't believe that would happen. And it did come to pass. I did have an electric stove in my first home in West Hempstead, and the highways were built so that we could drive up to the Catskill Mountains on a highway, and we could drive out to Long Island on a highway, and all the things that they told us what happened did happen. And I'm sure that a lot of the things that are being created now that seem, well, your imagination is probably much better than mine ever was. But when Uncle Stephen was born, prior to that, we had a wedding shower for Aunt Molly, and we had Chinese food at the luncheon. And that night we were at Aunt Jerry's house. That was Poppy's sister, and she had a daughter, Paula, and Paula wanted Chinese food, and we went out for Chinese food. And the next day, Stephen was born, and he hated Chinese food. It was hardly his favorite. And he was born on the day of our first wedding anniversary, and Poppy always felt that it was by his design that happened. And then when Aunt Wendy was born, we were playing cards. We were already living in our home in West Hempstead, and it was a Friday night, and we were playing cards with our dear friends Joan and her husband. And I said to Daddy, I think we better leave for the hospital, which was in Brooklyn. So we did, but on the way, we got to the hospital, and there was a luncheonette right next door, and I said, I'm hungry. So we went in, and I had a bacon and tomato sandwich and a black and white ice cream soda. And then I was ready to have your Aunt Wendy. And then when Aunt Deborah was born, I wanted her to be born on December 7th so that all my children could have a 7 on their birthdays. But the doctor said, no way. So I went home, and she was born on the next day, on the 8th, which was pretty good as well. Then when my grandchildren was born, Eric was with Poppy and I. We were living in Port Jefferson. We had taken him out to the animal farm further out on the island, where he was able to feed the baby animals with milk bottles and play with them. And then we got back, and we got a call that Michael was born. So we had a real baby to feed. And Michael was born, and then a year or so later, Jacob was born. And we all ran to the hospital to see Aunt Deborah. and the baby, and everything was fine, but Aunt Deborah had like freckles all over her face. And nobody wanted to tell her because we didn't want to frighten her. But when she looked in the mirror, she was horrified. They all faded away and she was fine, but that was a funny remembrance. And then when Julia was born, Poppy and I were driving up because we knew when Aunt Wendy was going to have her. On our way up, Poppy was a terrible driver. He was a great man, but he was a terrible driver. He made another lane on the parkway. If there were 3 lanes, he made the 4th lane to get access to the exit. And of course, the cop stopped us. And fortunately, he believed our story, which was the truth, that we were on our way to the hospital because my daughter was having a baby. So we got to the hospital, and Julia was born, and she was a beautiful baby girl, perfect. And we stayed. That Poppy went back to Long Island, and I stayed. And I took Aunt Wendy and Alan's car to go to White Plains to pick up the layette. And on the way there, the brakes of the car went, and I was in the middle of a 4-section highway. And to avoid having an accident and crashing into, have anyone else crash into me, I turned to right, and they were building a big civic center in White Plains at that time. And I drove the car right into a big plow, which stopped the car. And I was very lucky because I wasn't hurt, nobody was hurt. And they were wonderful men working there, and they called the police, and to make a long story short, they got the car to repair. I rented another car, drove to the store, picked up Julia's layette, and went to the hospital. So I had an adventure with all of my children. When Rebecca was born, Uncle David had called me about 10 o'clock in the morning, and and Deborah was getting ready to have the baby. And by 1 o'clock, I was on a plane, and I was in Joplin, Missouri by 5 o'clock that day to greet Rebecca. So all of my grandchildren were born with interesting stories, and I've enjoyed them all ever since. And with you new babies, every one of them, you had a special birth. Sloan, when you were born, it was a freezing, icy February day. And Aunt Wendy drove me to the hospital, and we saw you, and you were so tiny and so cute, as you are today, still tiny and cute, now that you're 4 years old. And then it was Stefano that was born, and that was very exciting because I had a feel, well, Sloan, you're also named after your grandfather, Stephen. But I knew that Uncle Michael and Aunt Valeria were going to also name him after Uncle Stephen. And we knew it was going to be a boy. And sure enough, it was a beautiful boy with the biggest shock of black hair imaginable for a newborn baby. And he was named Stefano, right after Uncle Stephen. And soon after that, dear little Eleanor was born. Beautiful, beautiful little girl. And such fun to watch on video, as all of you are. You got to send more videos. And then we had Gabriel, who is our newest and will be 4 months old on the 1st of March. No, I'm sorry, on the 3rd of March. The 1st of every month is Eleanor. The 2nd of every month is Stefano, and the 3rd of every month is Gabriel. And Sloan is on the 16th, sweet 16 of every month. So that kind of brings me pretty up to date with all of you. So I will remember all of you forever. And when you see this, I hope you remember a little bit, or think a little bit, about me and how much I love you all. Eric, when you were born, there were like about 2 or 3 false alarms where your mom and dad rushed to the hospital, called Poppy and I and Grandma Sil and Poppy Cal, and we all rushed to the hospital, false alarm. the third time, it was the right time. You were born. And we all rushed to the hospital and had your circumcision in the hospital where your father, like, fainted. And we all celebrated, and you were our firstborn. It was like a blessing. And you were named after Papi Is, because in the Sephardic religion they name after the living, and we certainly weren't going to call you Isadora Irving, and your mom picked Eric Matthew, which is a beautiful name. And that's the story about you. At the time that I was 12 years old and started the junior high school in the new neighborhood, I was about 11. I had a little girlfriend named Grace, and she lived far away from the school, and she would very often have lunch with me at my home with my mom, and my mom would make really extensive lunches like whitefish salad and chocolate pudding and all kinds of goodies. And Grace joined me with that and loved it. And on our way to school, we each had 2 pennies to buy candy, and we would buy a jelly bar, which was a penny, and a marshmallow twist was a penny. So for 2 pennies, we had our chocolate fix. And I remember that clearly, walking to school, stopping at the candy store, and our 2 pennies were so precious to us. I'm sure today you couldn't do very much with 2 pennies, and it would cost you far more for a jelly bar and a chocolate twist. In the process of changing jobs, one of the jobs I had was working for this caustic soda and soda ash importers. They did a lot of business with South America, and they made a huge amount of money. One man was an American fellow, and the other was European. And the European had the smarts and the contacts, and the American fellow had the money to put up for their business. And I worked for them for quite a while, and it was during this time that Papi came out of the service. It was the end of the war, and I met Papi on the subway. I was going to work, and he was carrying a little suitcase, and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I have a job. I'm a jewelry salesman." And he had this case with costume jewelry. And I wished him luck, and we both went on our ways. And a few mornings later, I met him on the train again, and I said, "How is it going?" And he said, it's not going well. I'm bringing the case back to them, and I will never work for anyone again." And he said, "Where are you guys?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm off to work." And he asked me what kind of work I did, and then he asked me if we could, go out, and we made a date, and we did go out, and I told him about the business that the people I worked for was in, and he said, "That sounds interesting. I'd like to go into my own business. Would you help me?" And I did help him. I did. I got the names of the customers and what they sold and who they sold it to. I was really like an inside helper. But then I would go to work. I would be finished with work at 5 o'clock, and I'd meet Papi. He had rented office space at 350 Fifth Avenue. That was about 33rd Street, not too far from the Empire State Building. And I would work with him. He had the rented space. He had a typewriter, and I would transcribe notes, write letters to the different customers, making them offers. And in time, for that space, Papi borrowed $500 from his father for stationery and to rent the space. And in time, we gave Papa Sam back that money. And in years to come, he was sorry he took it back. He said he should have become a partner with Papi, but that would never have happened. Anyway, from that space, Papi moved. We rented a space on Lower Manhattan. It was a regular office. And then I left the job that I had, and that's when we were married, and I went to work for Papi full-time. And Uncle Mark had come to work for him at that point because Norma insisted that Papi take his brother in. And Mark had been in the Merchant Marine, and he had a $1,000 bill that he had gotten somewhere overseas, and it had blood on it, and no bank would accept it. But one of the brother-in-laws, Uncle Mo, and Betty's husband, that was Poppy's sister and his brother-in-law, knew of money lenders that took the $1,000 bill and gave Mark $750 for it, and that's the money that he put into the business. That was all that he did, and that made him a partner. And as time went on, we moved. We changed from caustic soda and soda ash, which had been very profitable, into stainless steel. And by that time, Poppy moved uptown to 125th Street and started a small warehouse. And then he moved to 110th Street with a bigger warehouse, and then to Long Island City with a really huge warehouse. And the rest is history. Then he built his building in Port Washington while we were living in Great Neck. And those were the very good years, and he did very, very well there. And then things changed. And Poppy decided to leave the business, which we had founded, which I was very much against. But again, I wasn't strong enough to insist that he not do it. And he sold it to Mark. By that time, Jack had become a partner, and he sold it to Mark and Jack. That was another time.
Okay.
A little bit of a story about Poppy Isadore's mom and dad. His mom came from Greece and his dad came from Turkey. And they met, he was a peddler with a wagon, horse and wagon, selling all kinds of pots and pans, going from town to town. And he came to the town where Norna lived, and he saw her, and she was very beautiful, and he fell in love with her. And her father was a very comfortable man in town and wanted no part of this peddler for his daughter. So what Poppy Sam did was invite her father to the local tavern, trying to impress him. And what he did was get him very drunk. And the story is that he fixed him up with a lady of the night, but we don't know whether that's true. But he got him so drunk that he consented to Papa Sam and Norna getting married. And they did, and they had, Aunt Jerry was born in Europe, and they came to America when Aunt Jerry was 9 months old, and she was just 10 years older than me, so they came here in 1915. And they lived on the Lower East Side and had no family, but the people that they crossed the ocean with became their friends and like their family over the years, because they all came from similar circumstances. And they lived on the East Side for many years until they moved to Williamsburg a long time later, and Nonna had 7 children. She had Aunt Jerry, then Uncle Louie, then Aunt Betty, then Daddy, Poppy, and then she had Mark and Jack and Clarissa. Daddy was right in the middle, and he was named after Norna's father. And he was born during a very good time for them. They were financially doing very well, so she called him her Pasha. And he was born with a silver spoon. And she always seemed to favor him over the years. And he was very attached to her and very good to her, and all her sons were very good to her. But Daddy was, I think, closer to her than Mark and Jack were. At least he listened to her more than they did. She was a strong lady, a very strong lady. And she was a good mother, good grandmother, very strong-willed. That's it. So many new things will come to pass. I don't know what your life will be like, but I just want to leave this message. I want you all to love each other. I want you all to keep in touch with each other. I want you all to remember each other and respect each other, visit each other. Don't become strange to each other. Call, text, whatever the new things may be. Just enjoy your life, be healthy, be happy, and enjoy your family. I love you all. That's about it. I don't want to end this on a weepy note. I'm not sad and I'm not weepy. It's just very emotional going through my life and thinking of all of you who are babies now, as maybe 9 or 10 years old, watching this and what you would think. And I just love you all and wish you all the best. And I'm very happy to do this and leave you with this memory of me. I hope you're not bored, because I didn't mean it to be that way. I just wanted you to have a little insight into what was like, life was like for the past 93 years. And it's good now. It's very good now. And I'm very lucky to be here and very proud to have all of you as my family. I love you all.